In today's farm report, traditional milking times have been twice per day, usually once in the morning and once in the evening. But some producers are now going to 3 times a day milking with the belief that it helps increase herd efficiency and productivity. Jim Salfer with the University of Minnesota Extension Service Office shares his thoughts.
Sometimes when cash flow gets a little bit tight, I'll get calls and producers will ask me about milking 3 times a day, or even without that, I'll get a few calls a year and they'll ask me about pros and cons and how much milk they get 3 times a day. So I'm going to just kind of run through that. There's actually a couple spreadsheets out there. There's one at Minnesota, Michigan State has one. There's, I think, might be a little bit better trying to look at analyzing whether you ought to go 3 times a day milking. So I'll talk a little bit today about just the pros and cons of doing that. When you look at all the research studies that have been done, and there's been a lot of them done comparing 2x to 3x, people talk about 1%, but typically you'll get between about a 7-pound and a 8.5-pound response. So I typically tell people to think about 7.5 to 8 pounds more milk per cow per day. And basically components will tend to drop just a little bit, but overall you will clearly increase your milk check by going to 3 times a day milking. That's why people do it. They'll also typically, people that'll milk go 3x, your somatic cell count will be a little bit lower. Typically your reproduction may or may not be better because cows are milking a little bit heavier, but it may be better just because there's people around the barn a lot more often. Some other advantages outside of the increased milk production, there's people around, especially in smaller farms, because you're calving on a regular basis, or there's people around the cows calving on a regular basis. Of course, that doesn't come without its challenges. There's a lot of cons about milking 3 times a day. You'll use more electricity, you'll use more soap, all of those other factors go into there. The obvious one, of course, is labor. You're either going to be family labor that's going to be working more hours, or it's going to be an extra hired shift. And so for most of our farms, the cons kind of outweigh even from a labor standpoint. When I run through the numbers, even if I use 8 pounds of milk, typically when you've got those shorter shifts and you're not milking that many hours, it really just doesn't seem like it pays very well. And so I really don't encourage people to go to 3x unless it really works out in your dairy. You're a big dairy, you've got hired labor anyway. So for many of our small farms, and I know there are small farms that milk 3 times a day and it works out really well for them. But really from a purely economic standpoint, you've got to think about the wear and tear on the people as well as the wear and tear on the equipment. But there is tools out there that can help you think that through. Just make sure you try and think about all the pros and all the cons, and will it work in your situation. This has been Jim Salfer with the University of Minnesota Extension in St. Cloud.
A reminder to motorists that fall harvest is underway and that they should keep an eye out for slow-moving farm equipment as the machinery moves from field to field or from field to farmyard. Always stay safe and don't pass unless you know you can. Calving time is extremely stressful for producers, especially when they're not sure if there's going to be complications. But, as Jim Salfer with the University of Minnesota Extension Service Office reports, there is new technology to help producers.
I'm going to cover today what I consider at least kind of a fun topic. It's about technologies, but a specific technology. And when I was growing up, it's going to be calving technologies and identifying when cows calve. And, we all remember, if you live on a farm, or many listeners are probably dairy farmers, I milked cows for many, many years. And it was always I never minded it. I know it was more annoying for my wife to get up in the middle of the night and go out to the barn, traipse out to the barn, especially in the winter. Winter's coming, and check if cows are calving. Well, of course not. And the next morning you'd get up. We'd try to get up once or twice a night because, of course, you wanted to be there in case there were any issues. But now there's some technology out there that will really help that. And I would suspect this will probably catch on reasonably fast. I'm not sure the cost of this technology, but there are some physiological changes that happen to cows around calving time. There's a decrease in body temperature. There's an increase in lying and standing events. There's increased tail movements. There's decreased rumination that people know. And so there's been a couple of companies that have looked specifically and said, can we put this into an algorithm and do a really good job of predicting when cows calve? One of them is It's manufactured by Madria. It's called a Velphone. And what it really does is there's an alert sent via a text message. It's a device that's inserted into the vagina. And then there's an alert that's sent via text message identifying when the bolus is activated, and that goes in there. And then there's a temperature sensor that determines when there's a significant drop in temperature, and that basically means you're within 48 hours of calving. And so it will send you a text message to your phone when that happens, and it says, okay, cow number 123 is within 48 hours after calving. And then there's another text message that's sent when the animal's water breaks, and then of course a bolus is expelled out of the vagina because a calf is coming out, and it sends you another text message that said, this cow's probably going to calve within the next 2 hours. And so I think it's an interesting technology. And I'm sure many people are thinking, does it work? Well, actually, Kentucky's done some research looking at that. And the graduate student there found that the temperature, about 60% of the time, the temperature drops were within 48 hours of calving. There's another 32% of the time that was more than 48 hours before calving, and there was 10% of the time that there was really no signal. So, I don't know, it's reasonably accurate. But when you look at the signal that says this cow is going to calve, that was about 90% accurate, which you might expect. Sometimes it came out early, sometimes it didn't come out at all, the bolus. But in reality, I think these technologies are going to catch on. I think for some of our smaller farms, again, I'm not sure of the cost, but I think they could really help. A lot of this getting up during the night kind of stuff, and just put your bed by your phone and it'll let you know that a cow's going to calve. This has been Jim Salfer with the University of Minnesota Extension in St. Cloud.
During harvest season, drivers need to be especially cautious on rural roads. Hello everyone, I'm Cindy Young with Brownfield with this National Farm Safety and Health Week message. While only a fifth of the U.S. population lives in rural areas, 3 out of 5 fatal traffic crashes happen there. That is a startling statistic that we can change by making some simple adjustments. The National Education Center for Agricultural Safety advises patience with farmers moving equipment between fields. Only pass in designated zones and be sure there is no oncoming traffic before pulling into the left lane. Be cautious when approaching blind intersections caused by mature crops. Avoid using a mobile phone to call or text while driving. Farmers, use your lights and flashers and make sure your slow-moving vehicle emblem is easy to see. And everyone on those rural roads, just slow down. I'm Cindy Young with Brownfield.